Recording in progress.
Well, good afternoon, and I'm here to talk to an old friend. Uh, Dr. Kizart actually took over one of my classes one time, so we go back a long ways. Yeah, and I had uh, I did a lot of things and a lot of work with Harris Stowe Teachers College, and she was there for quite some time, and we have some mutual friends. But we'll start. We're going to be talking about her book in just a minute, Beyond uh, Implicit and Explicit Bias. But before I jump into the book, I'm going to turn things over to her. And in a minute or two, could you just give us some highlights of your background and very impressive career? So it's
Thank
all you.
you. And I'm just getting started, Sam. Thank you so
I
much.
hope so. Yes.
Thank you so much for the invite to your podcast. I have so much respect for you. We were talking before we started. I remember when I was asked to teach one of your courses for a summer at a university, and I kept your syllabi the same. The assignments and things that you gave your students and the opportunity to really showcase what they were learning was something that I learned from as a teacher and now as in higher ed. I've worked in education for about 26 years. I started out in the special education classroom when special education was in the basement. And I was part of that movement to inclusive education for our students with disabilities. And so when I know for me and my lens, when I talk about inclusion, I'm talking about for all students, right? I know this interesting political era, people often unfortunately just think about race when it comes to inclusion, but my lens work of equity and inclusion of all is with all students. Currently, I have a consulting company, Doc Kizart Inc., where I work with schools and some nonprofits and businesses every once in a while to support them in cultivating more inclusive spaces for everyone, both for their clients, for students, for the people who work in the infrastructure, stakeholders, and things of that nature. So this is a labor of love, something I really love to do. So thank you again for having me.
Okay. Now let's get into things. Let's see if I can do this without messing things up. Okay. Uh, the book we're going to be talking about, newly published, Beyond Implicit and Explicit Bias, and listen to this tag, Strategies for Healing the Root Causes of Inequity in Education. So, quite a task that you have for yourself in the book. Within the book, each section, you break down bias and you talk about the various kinds of biases. And you've already indicated that we're talking about more than just race or anything else. We're talking about a much broader spectrum. And
Absolutely.
you got some real kudos in a recent book review. I think this appeared at April 9th. And here's what he had. But he said it so well, I'm just going to quote him. Okay. For each bias, Kazart presents a clear definition, self assessment tools, realistic school based scenarios, reflective questions, concrete strategies for counteraction. This structured approach makes complex psychological concepts accessible and immediately applicable to educational settings from K through 12 in higher education. So I think he's just said that so well. And what that means, my audience basically are teachers and administrators, and they're interested in things they can use day to day. So I'm going to turn it over to you and talk about your book and maybe a couple of places where what are some things that they can find in the book and use from the book when they run into these situations with bias. It's all you.
So first, let me say that this is not a DEI book, right? This, I think that's really important because we're in this space where when people think of certain topics, we think of that acronym. This is a how do we as educators ensure that we are making sure that we focus on all of our students. And part of that is examining and managing our own personal biases, right? Dr. Beverly Tatum said that biases are like small. It's in the air, right? You can't help but to have bias. A bias is a preference. And there's nothing wrong with having a preference. The challenge is when those preferences interrupt what we strive to do with students, especially in the educational arena. The other thing I think is important to note is that many of the biases that I discuss in my book been studied since the 70s, some since 1924, right? These are very well research based biases that I think every person, and definitely anyone who is in charge of and facilitating the academic and social development of children and any student, should definitely know about biases. I want to take one, for example, in-group bias. In-group bias is one that if we're honest with ourselves, we can definitely see in ourselves and in our school. In-group bias occurs when it's kind of like an affinity bias, when you identify with an in-group, right? So me as a woman, I may identify more closely and have more empathy or compassion with other women, right? It's nothing wrong with that. However, as a teacher, if I notice that I have boys in my class that are not doing well academically, I need to stop and look at my materials. Do I have gender neutral books, or do I have books that appeal to different variety of learners and different students, right? Is the way that I'm teaching differentiated enough to make sure that different learning styles can also pick up what I'm putting down, right? And what happens is when there's an in-group bias, we tend to be kind of warm towards people who are in our affinity group and a little colder to those who are not in our affinity group. And again, most of the times, it's not even on purpose. It's something that's subconscious, right? Because as human beings, we belonging is physiological. We want to belong, right? Another bias that I talk about in the book has to do with herd mentality. Our ability as human beings to want to belong, sometimes so much so that we will agree with whoever is the dominant in the room. And let me tell you, sometimes that can really take away from innovation and creativity. I'll give an example from my book, Herd Mentality Bias, and this is a true story from a school district that I used to work with. It was, how education is predominantly women as teachers, right? And that's not secret. It's not a bad thing. It is what it is. I have a mentor who used to say the truth should not be taken as an insult. So the truth is, in education, majority of the teachers are women. And so we were in a data team meeting, and there were about 6 women sitting around the table, and we were looking at student data. The task was to look at student data, to look at these assignments and decide what students still needed support with certain aspects of the assignment. So for example, I think this may have been an inference assignment like reading comprehension. So we wanted to see, okay, what students still needed support with inferencing? What students still needed support with predicting, right? And so we were grouping the students and kind of putting them in piles so that we can do some individual group and some small group assignments. These teachers were on a roll. They were coming up with some really amazing creative ideas and strategies these students. And then the principal walked in the room. The principal was a male. And when that principal walked in the room, in their body language, I saw the women in that room, they kind of shrunk down. And when he said, okay, so what are we up to? What do we got going on? They started to explain to them, to him, what they were doing, the assignments. My job was to support them in having a bus data team meeting. So it wasn't my job to intervene or to say anything. And so they said to him, well, we're noticing some students are really good, doing well with inferencing, and some students they need some help with, with inferencing in these areas. So, we weren't sure, you got me, we weren't really sure what strategies we should use. What do you think? And that's what they asked him. What do you think? Right? And so he started sharing with them what he thought. Not once did he ask them, well, what strategies have you all talked about? Conversely, it was only one of the female teachers who said, well, we were talking about some things before you got here. Can we share? And the rest of them kind of looked at her like, can you be quiet? Right? And that's an example of, and that's again a real example. That's an example of herd mentality bias. Everybody kind of went along with the herd. Two examples: the six that were sitting there, they were all kind of working together. And then when the male walked in the room, it acted as though they didn't have any ideas, right? And they deferred to that person's ideas. Now, there could be a lot happening there. It could be a school culture where there were things going on in the school culture that were beyond her mentality bias, but that is on the surface an example. The other thing that I want to share, and I think it's really important, is that this book is not just about biases. It's really top heavy on strategies, and it's top heavy on reflection opportunities. So, for example, if you take a look at, and for those who have the book and those who are going to get the book, thank you. If you take a look at each chapter, in each chapter there is a bias assessment. You can't see it, but there's a bias assessment tool. And this assessment tool is an opportunity for us to reflect on our own personal biases and biases that we have seen in our interaction. Additionally, there are steps. So, for example, we're talking about herd mentality bias. I'll read a few steps that are outlined in the book. One is ask yourself, what is my motivation and what is my why? Doing this helps to ensure that our behavior aligns with our views and our values. Two, celebrate yourself for recognizing that your behavior or verbal stance may be in or out of alignment with your views and values. Think own intelligence. You are now among those who make conscious, intentional decisions instead of agreeing just to agree or to pacify others. Another one, listen to others outside of the herd and consider their perspectives as well. There's more strategies in here. And for each, again, for each bias, there are pause and ponders, there are opportunity to reflect, and there's also strategies in this book. Top heavy on strategies.
Okay, well, I just think what this does for teachers and administrators alike is gives them a whole toolbox to work from
Yeah.
and things to go to. And I love the fact that there are so many everyday examples in there. I think that you just took one, well, you have, gosh, all those different chapters and all those possible examples. So I think that you can, teachers can make a really, really excellent use of this book. And I'm really impressed with it. So we're we're now approaching kind of like final thoughts about all this. Um, Usually around this time in the interview, I start asking my interviewee, "Is there anything that you wanted to say about the book, or anything that you wanted to say about current situations that you haven't said?" this is your time. So anything that we've left out, I think you've done a great job of explaining the book and yeah, the resources that are in the book. But now, beyond the book, anything else or any other ideas you want to that you haven't talked about that you wanted to make sure to get in?
Thank you for asking. I know that we are in a very interesting time in education where people, educators, and everyday workers are really concerned about this language of diversity and this language of ensuring that we are being inclusive. I want to make sure that in my communication, it is very important to understand that as a professional who has worked in the area of inclusive education for a very long time, this work is about everyone. In my book, I discuss people who have disabilities, students who are from the LGBTQ plus community, our white students, our Hispanic students. If you can think about various areas of diversity, I have done my best to include that in this book. When we talk about diversity, there's 34 different elements of diversity. And guess what? As educators, we run across a lot of differences. The question is, how do we honor those differences in our classroom to ensure we are supporting our students in every way possible to go out here in this world and make it better. We all need to live and coexist in a world that is better. And I believe in our ability to do that. And in order to do that, we must acknowledge our differences and make peace with them and navigate with each other and with our students to support them no matter what they look like, no matter their language, their aptitude. That's what being a good educator is about. Taking students from where they are and making sure they're prepared for the world and to exercise and to explore their talents and to elevate their talents so that they make the world a better place.
Bias strategies for healing the root causes of inequity in education. And lots of tools, lots of practical ideas, uh, certainly worth a look. Uh, and I think that educators are going to be excited about this particular book. So thank you so much. There's one last almost silly thing. Okay, at the end of every Bomberito interview, we do what's called a Zoom wave goodbye. So we put the world's biggest smile on our face and we wave goodbye. So if we can do that, Zoom wave goodbye. And oh my
Oh my
God,
goodness.
thank you so much.